the powder blue Bolts in Los Angeles, they had plenty to answer for this past season after what had transpired a year prior, like actually over a year prior. So in case you were wondering what exactly happened in January of last year, so back in the first round of the 2022 NFL playoffs, or 2023, whatever you want to call it, the Chargers, they held a 28-0 second quarter lead over the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars before eventually, just like they always love to do, then they loved to charger it away in humiliating fashion. So they gave up a 28-0 lead. They let it slip away, and they lost that game. Despite that, though, owner Dean Spanos kept head coach Brandon Staley around for unknown reasons. Like, why? I was really questioning, like, why the hell you decided to keep Brandon Staley around when the dude lost a big ass lead like that, and you of course. Well, what more to expect, huh? So anyway, all that aside, you head into a season. Staley was tasked to figure out how to get back into the playoff hunt and how not to clipper it again like he did last time out. But unfortunately for the Chargers, that didn't pan out. None of it panned out because they suffered some key injuries during this season. Mainly some two key injuries that was going to plummet the Chargers offense. I mean, looking at the Chargers season, they started off pretty bad. They were already 0-2 when they traveled to Minnesota on the back end of a 2-game road trip, going into week 3. They won that game in Minnesota, but they paid a big price in that game because they wound up losing one of their top receivers early in the season in Mike Williams. Mike Williams already had a sketchy health history, but that's not the point. His loss was going to end up being a very big one for the offense, which had to rely heavily on Keenan Allen. And on the other side, there wasn't really a reliable number 2 for Justin Herbert to go to. So that offense was really, really struggling hard. It became even less explosive. But then once week 14 rolled around, that's when it started to get even worse. The Chargers went on to lose Justin Herbert for the year to a fractured finger in his throwing hand in the first quarter of that game against Denver. Talk about major L, because once they rolled with backup Easton Stick, the offense sank even more, starting with an embarrassing Thursday night stinker against the Raiders that came 4 days later. Yeah, it was that bad. So, if you want to talk about the offense even further, look at running back Austin Eckler. His production dipped. Eckler headed into this season coming off contract extensions that broke down, and it looked like, considering how that went, it looked like he is going to be motivated to prove them wrong. That, you should have paid me a good amount of money. But instead, he proved the Chargers front office right, that, no, we're not going to pay you. We're not going to give you the money that you want. Because Austin Eckler was not as effective in both rushing and receiving as he had been the last 2 years. And he actually managed to turn the ball over more than he scored. So for the Chargers running game, it was ineffective. It is nearly ineffective. And then, of course, you have the season-long usual tradition of clippering. Chargering. For those of you that really rag on me for saying clippering, because, well, face it, the Chargers are like the Clippers. They love to choke it up. They're like brother and sister. I think it's safe to say, because they're not, the Chargers are in Los Angeles now, so they're like the little brother to the Clippers, and they're gonna be in the vicinity of each other starting later this year when the Clippers go to the Intuit Dome. How isn't that convenient? now they can have sleepovers together. Sorry, not sidetracking. But of course it wouldn't be the Chargers without the annual tradition of clippering away a good amount of games that they want. They could have won. I mean, yeah, it's one thing to get into a shootout with the Lions and the Dolphins, But then you blow leads to the Titans, the Packers, and the Bills. It's like, come on, man. You can't. I guess it's the never-ending tradition of the Chargers. Sorry, but I mean, not all. It wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad for the Chargers because you had at least two standout players on this team, and in a season full of struggle, and that was Khalil Mack and Keenan Allen. Because of those injuries or underperformances on both sides of the ball, someone had to step up, especially considering their head coach sucking ass. Linebacker Khalil Mack was one of them. He had a return to form, if you could say that, this past year with a career high 17 sacks. He even had that 6-sack game on Aiden O'Connell of the Raiders at home early in the season. And meanwhile, on offense, the already mentioned injury to Mike Williams forced Keenan Allen to step up. And he did such in a big way. Over a 1,000-yard receiving season and 7 touchdowns in 13 games that he started all year. It was a little unfortunate that his season was cut short with a heel injury, but he was the de facto number one receiver that kept the offense somewhat functioning. And another positive for this Chargers team was that, well, they cut the snake off the head off the snake. They fired general manager Tom Telesco and head coach Brandon Staley after week 15. Now, obviously, the bigger head of the snake is Dean Spanos, but I mean, obviously, you can't get rid of him because, well, he's the owner. But anyway, the Chargers didn't just get blown out in that Amazon Prime game for $15.99 a month in Las Vegas in week 15. They were embarrassed. They were clippered to oblivion, getting shut out at 48-0 before a final score of 63-21. So Dean Spanos, he made the move that he should have made back in January of last year. So, I mean, yeah, if it was too little, too late. I mean, but at least he made the move finally. So the Chargers ended their season 5-12. They had their usual tradition of chargering winnable games, and it was made even worse once Justin Herbert went down to injury. But the silver lining in all this, to this crappy season, is that once Dean Spanos finally smartened up and fired Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco, he hired an actual coach with actual success, with winning, and that was both in college and the NFL, and was fresh off of winning a college football national championship, and that was Jim Harbaugh. So he actually made a good move for once. So joining Jim Harbaugh was new general manager Jim Horwitz, who previously served as the Baltimore Ravens director of player personnel. And looking at 1 month later from the major decision, who knows? Who knows what the Chargers will be able to do? Maybe they'll finally break that curse of clippering, or maybe they'll just be the same old Chargers this offseason. So looking at their offseason, they have around, they're still in the red. So Jim Harbaugh and Jim Horwitz have some work to do. They're over $25 million above the cap, so they got to make some decisions on who to get rid of or who to restructure. So some decisions to be made if they want to get under the cap and they want to spend in free agency and their own draft class. So speaking of the draft, they have the 5th overall pick, so a good spot to see who they want to get. Looking at some of their key free agents, obviously one of them is Austin Eckler, something to consider if they want to keep him around. Receiver Jalen Guyton, a reserve receiver. Linebacker Kenneth Murray, and then backup quarterback Easton Stick, who didn't do all that bad, but it's just that, he could produce on offense. Looking at some of the needs to address this offseason, like I said, you got to get under the salary cap first. That new regime of Horwitz and Harbaugh, they have that first tall task of having to undo some of the previous general manager, Tom Telesco's dirty work. That includes his financial decision-making. They got to get under the money line if they want to get help, let alone draft anyone, whether that be restructuring or releasing some players that have big, fat contracts. So they got to get under the money line first. And then you got to get some help in the secondary, especially some help for corner Asante Samuel Jr., because that man cannot do it alone. especially considering that, they got J.C. Jackson, I think it was like last offseason or this past offseason, and man, he did not pan out. Sadly, a very disappointing acquisition. So they're going to have to once again find some help with Asante Samuel Jr., go and get at least 2 cornerbacks in the draft. And yeah, hopefully it'll be the answer. And then you got to find some upgrades on the offensive line. The offensive line was actually a surprise weakness this past year, especially on the right side. So they got to draft both a guard and a tackle to help out Corey Linsley and just protect Justin Herbert's blind side. And then you got to decide what to do at running back. Running back Austin Eckler, he's been the focal point of the offense for the last 2 years. But like I said, he really disappointed this past season with just 6 overall touchdowns and his performance not matching the ones in years past. So as the debate rolls on whether running backs should be paid a ton, Harbaugh and Horwitz need to decide how to address the position, whether it's bringing back Austin Eckler or going with someone else. So the Chargers, they did Chargers things in 2023. But if you look at the bright side, they probably did the deed of firing their head coach and the general manager at the right time. Now in comes in Jim Harbaugh, fresh off a national championship, and a general manager with some good experience in Baltimore and Jim Horwitz. Now, as long as they're allowed to fix the mess their way under Dean Spanos, the Powder Blue siblings, well, it depends on what they're able to do, but they can allowed to do what they need to do. They can lead 2023 in defense.